The alkali dust of the Arizona territory settled on May Caldwell like a shroud. It coated the cheap, dusty lace of her bodice and caked on the worn-through soles of her boots. She had walked the last 5 miles, the stage driver refusing to take her further than the county line without another dollar she did not have. Now, she stood at the edge of Tularosa, a town that seemed built from desperation and splintered wood. It was 1880, and the world was hard. But Tularosa looked harder. Men eyed her as she walked the single street. She kept her gaze fixed on the warped boardwalk beneath her feet, her shoulders hunched. She was looking for refuge, but she was braced for scorn. It was the only greeting she had known for a long time. Her past was a brand on her soul, a story no lady dared speak of, abandoned by her preacher father, passed from one man of influence to the next. She had been shaped by survival, not virtue. She had no illusions about salvation. She just needed a place to stop running. Fort Mason was 3 days' ride behind her, but the shadow of Marshall Hayes felt like it was breathing down her neck. He held the law in his fist, and she had defied him. She had escaped. The thought gave her a small, cold spark of satisfaction, but it was quickly smothered by the terror of his reach. He would not let her go. He saw her as his property, and men like him never let their property go. She needed work, anything, mending, scrubbing, serving, anything that would earn her a bed and a meal, and keep her from having to sell the only thing she had left. Her eyes scanned the crude storefronts, a general store, a blacksmith, a land office, and the saloon, the Golden Slipper. The name was a cruel joke. The building sagged, its paint peeling, the bat-wing doors swinging with a weary creak. She knew, with a sinking heart, that this was the only place that would not ask for references. She pushed through the doors. The midday quiet of the saloon was thick, smelling of stale beer, sweat, and the sharp tang of cheap tobacco. A few men nursed warm drinks at the bar. A man with a dirty apron and an impressive mustache was wiping the bar top with a grayer rag. He looked up as she entered, his eyes missing nothing. They took in the torn lace, the exhaustion, the faint, old bruise on her cheekbone. "Lost, miss?" he asked. His voice was gravel. "I'm looking for work," May said. Her own voice was a croak. She cleared her throat. "Cleaning, washing, anything you have." The barkeep, Silas, leaned on the bar. He squinted, judging her. He judged her strength, her health, her desperation. He saw enough of the latter to know he had the advantage. "Ain't hiring girls for the tables," he said, jerking his chin toward the stairs that led to the rooms above. "Not for that," May said quickly, heat rising in her face. "The floors, the spittoons, washing glasses, whatever you need done. I don't need much. A meal, a place to sleep." Silas grunted. He thought for a long moment. "Got a cot in the back storeroom, full of rats, mostly, but it's dry." He pointed to the back of the room. "You scrub this floor till I can see my face in it. Wash every glass till it shines. Haul water and empty the slop. You get 1 plate of beans at the end of the night. And the cot. You stop working. You're out. That's the bargain." "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me," Silas said, tossing the rag into a bucket of murky water. "Start with the spittoons." And so, May's life in Tularosa began. The work was brutal. Her hands, already calloused, soon split and bled from the harsh lye soap. She hauled buckets of water from the town well until her shoulders screamed. She scrubbed filth that seemed ingrained in the very wood of the building. She worked from noon until the last drunk was dragged out, sometimes 2 or 3 in the morning. Then she would collapse onto the thin, lice-ridden cot in the windowless storeroom, the sounds of the saloon still echoing in her ears. She slept the sleep of the utterly exhausted, a sleep haunted by the image of Marshall Hayes's cold eyes. The men who drank at the Golden Slipper watched her. At first, they were curious. Then they grew bold. They made comments, low and suggestive. May learned to make herself invisible. She kept her eyes down, her face blank. She moved quickly, a ghost in a dirty dress, smelling of soap and stale whiskey. Silas never called her May. He took to calling her Whiskey Girl, not to her face, but loud enough for her and everyone else to hear. Whiskey Girl, more rags. Whiskey Girl, this floor ain't clean. It was a brand, a way of marking her. It told the other men that she belonged to the saloon, that she was just one small step above the painted women upstairs. She was scenery. She was disposable. She endured. She had been enduring her whole life. Each day she woke up, her body aching, and she was not in Fort Mason. That was enough. She had been there maybe 2 weeks. A cold snap had hit the territory, and the wind bit with the promise of an early snow. The saloon was packed, the men driven inside by the cold. The air was thick with smoke and the sound of raised voices. May was moving through the crowd, gathering empty mugs, when the bat-wing doors swung open and a new man entered. He was thick-set, with a heavy jaw and a smug look. He wore a deputy's star, but it wasn't from Tularosa. His eyes scanned the room and landed on May. She didn't notice him at first, not until he stepped directly into her path, forcing her to stop. She looked up, her stomach tightening. His eyes narrowed. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. "Well, I'll be," he said, his voice carrying over the din. "May Caldwell. Marshal Hayes has been wondering where his favorite little bird flew off to." May's blood turned to ice. The tray of mugs slipped from her numb fingers, crashing to the floor. Glass shattered. "You know this girl, deputy?" Silas asked, suddenly alert. "I know her," the deputy sneered. His eyes locked on May's. "She's a thief. Ran from Fort Mason with a heap of the marshal's brother's money." "I did not," May whispered, backing away. "He's offering a reward," the deputy continued, advancing on her. "A hefty one. I reckon I'll take you back myself, but seeing as it's a long ride, and we got time." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in like talons. "Maybe you and I can come to an arrangement first, for old time's sake." He started to drag her toward the back door. The saloon went quiet, the men watching. No one moved to help. She was the Whiskey Girl. She was nothing. "No," May said, her voice shaking. "Let me go." "She's coming with me. Barkeep," the deputy called out, yanking her hard. "Take it outside," Silas said, already turning back to his bar. The deputy shoved her out into the freezing alley. The cold air hit her like a slap. He slammed her against the rough, splintered wall of the saloon, his body pressed against hers, pinning her. "You were always too proud," he grunted, his hot, whiskey-soaked breath washing over her face. "Marshal Hayes, he likes to break proud things, but I get to play first." His hand fumbled with the front of her dress, tearing the already thin fabric. Something in May snapped. The terror vanished, replaced by a cold, white-hot rage. This was not her father's deacon. This was not the marshal's brother. This was not another man who would use her and discard her. She was done running. She brought her knee up, hard, connecting with his groin. He roared, a sound of pained surprise, and his grip loosened for a second. It was all she needed. Her hand, raw and strong from scrubbing, scrabbled against the ground near the slop buckets. Her fingers closed around the jagged, thick glass of a broken whiskey bottle. He lunged for her again, his face purple with rage. "You little bitch!" She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She swung the jagged glass in a vicious arc. It connected with the side of his face. The deputy screamed, a high, thin sound that was nothing like his earlier roar. He stumbled back, clutching his cheek, blood pouring through his fingers. He stared at her, his eyes wide with shock and pain. May didn't wait to see the rest. She ran. She didn't run toward the street. She ran deeper into the maze of alleys behind the buildings. Her lungs burned. She could hear the deputy shouting, "Stop her! She cut me!" She ducked behind the livery stables. her breath coming in ragged sobs. She found a large pile of old, damp hay, rotting in the corner. Without thinking, she burrowed into it, pulling the moldy stalks over her, curling into a tight, trembling ball. She was hidden from the street, hidden from the light. She squeezed her eyes shut, tasting the blood and bile in her throat, and prayed for the earth to swallow her. Bo Ransom did not like Tularosa. He came to town only when he had to, for flour, salt, and cartridges. He preferred the sharp, clean silence of his ranch high in the mountains, a place he had taken with his own hands after the war. He was a reclusive man, scarred by things he never spoke of, a former Confederate sharpshooter who now raised cattle and trusted no one. He was loading the last of his supplies onto his pack mule, hitched outside the livery. It was late, well past midnight. The wind was sharp, and the air smelled of snow. He was just about to mount his horse when he heard it. First came the shouting from the saloon. A man bellowed about being cut. Bo ignored it. Town business was not his. But then, after the shouting quieted, he heard another sound. It was small, almost lost in the wind, a choked-off cough, followed by a low, pained whimper. It came from the dark alley, near the stable's hay pile. Bo went still. His hand moved instinctively, resting on the butt of the Colt at his hip. This was how men got ambushed, sticking their nose where it didn't belong. He was wary, his senses on high alert. He drew his pistol, the click of the hammer being pulled back seeming impossibly loud in the night. He moved slowly, his boots making no sound on the hard-packed dirt. He reached the hay pile. It looked undisturbed, but the sound came again, a desperate gasp for air. Bo kicked at the hay. Nothing. He reached down and pulled a large clump of it away. And he saw her. She was a bundle of rags and terror. Her dress was torn open, her face bruised and smeared with dirt. There was blood on her hands, dark and drying in the cold. She was shaking violently, her eyes wide and unfocused, glazed with fever and shock. When she saw him, a dark shape looming over her, she flinched so hard she cried out, curling tighter. Bo froze. He looked from the woman back toward the lights of the saloon. He could see a group of men gathered, one of them holding a bloody cloth to his face. He saw the glint of the deputy's star. This was trouble, the worst kind. Lawman trouble. A woman who would cut a deputy was a woman who would hang. He should have walked away. He should have mounted his horse and ridden out, forgetting he ever saw her. His life was quiet. He'd fought to make it that way. But he didn't move. He looked back at the woman huddled in the hay. He saw the raw terror in her eyes, the desperate fight that had been extinguished, leaving only this broken, half-conscious creature. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of dying men in Tennessee, men who had nothing left to bargain with. He made his decision. It was swift, and he knew he might regret it. He holstered his pistol. "Hush," he said, his voice low. He didn't offer a hand. He simply bent down and scooped her into his arms. She was light, frail, like a bird. She whimpered, but she was too weak to fight. He carried her to his horse, not the mule. He mounted, settling her in front of him, her head lolling against his chest. He pulled his heavy wool coat open, wrapping one side of it around her as best he could. He rode out of Tularosa slowly, his face set like stone. Just another rancher heading home. No one challenged him. Once the last flickering lights of the town were swallowed by the hills and the rising wind, he urged the horse into a steady, ground-eating trot, climbing toward the mountains. May drifted in a painful, cold fog. She was aware of movement, the steady, jarring rhythm of a horse walking. She was aware of a biting cold that seemed to seep into her bones, making her teeth chatter uncontrollably. She was pressed against something hard, yet warm. It smelled of pine, wood smoke, and wool. She tried to open her eyes, but the lids were too heavy. She fell back into the darkness. She woke again. This time, she was still. The world was not moving. She was indoors, A fire crackled in a stone hearth across the room, casting flickering, distorted shadows on the walls. But the fire was losing its battle with the cold. A bitter wind howled outside, finding its way through every crack in the wood walls. May was on a narrow cot, buried under a thick, coarse wool blanket that smelled like the man. She tried to sit up. A sharp, blinding pain shot through her ribs, and she gasped, falling back. The sound made the man turn. He was sitting at a small, rough table, his back to her. He had been cleaning his rifle. Now he stood, and she saw him clearly for the first time. He was tall, broad-shouldered. His face was hard, angular, with a faint white scar that cut through his left eyebrow and disappeared into his dark hair. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, gray and unreadable. He looked at her, but his expression gave nothing away. "Where?" May whispered. Her throat felt like it was full of sand. "My cabin," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like rocks moving. "In the mountains, north of Tularosa." She shivered, pulling the blanket tighter. The wind screamed, rattling the single window frame. May looked toward it. It was completely white. "You're snowed in," he stated. It was not an apology. It was a fact. "Been coming down since I got us back, round 3 this morning. Woke up to a foot of it, likely be 2 or 3 more feet by nightfall." Trapped. The word echoed in her mind. She was trapped. Again. With a man. A stranger. A big, quiet man with a gun and a scar. The old, sick panic rose in her throat. She knew what this meant. She knew what men expected. He had saved her, and now payment was due. It was the only currency she had ever been allowed. Ignoring the fire in her ribs, she pushed herself up on one elbow. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely function. She looked at him, her eyes pleading, full of a shame so deep it had become a part of her. "I can pay you," she said, her voice trembling. "For the trouble, for saving me." She reached for the top of the blanket, her fingers fumbling with the edge. She started to pull it down, to push aside the torn, dirty lace of her dress. The man stood up, the chair scraped back, the sound violent in the small cabin. May flinched, squeezing her eyes shut, bracing herself. She expected him to cross the room, to take what she was offering. But he didn't move toward her. Instead, he turned his back to her. He walked to the fireplace and stared into the flames, his shoulders rigid. "Stop," he said. The word was sharp, not cruel but absolute, a command. May froze, her hand still clutching the blanket. She stared at his back, confused. "Don't give me something you don't want to." His words hung in the air, suspended between the howl of the wind and the crackle of the fire. She didn't understand. This was not how it worked. Men took, they didn't ask, they didn't stop. "What?" she breathed. He looked over his shoulder. The firelight caught the scar, making it stand out against his grim face. "I ain't him. I ain't any of them. You're safe from that here." He nodded toward her. "Pull the blanket up. You'll catch your death." Slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. May pulled the heavy wool back up to her chin. She was shaking again, but this time it was not just from the cold. The night was the longest of her life. He gave her the cot. He took a second, thinner blanket from a trunk and laid it on the floor near the hearth. He lay down with his back to her, his rifle on the floorboards beside him, within easy reach. May did not sleep. She watched the shadows dance. She listened to the storm rage outside, a mirror of the one inside her. She listened to the man's steady breathing. He had not asked her name. He had not touched her. He had not demanded anything. She was more afraid of this quiet, unsettling decency than she had ever been of the deputy's violence. It was a language she did not speak. Morning finally came, filtering through the snow-caked window as a dim, gray light. The cabin was frigid. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. May opened her eyes to see the man already up, adding logs to the hearth. He moved quietly, efficiently. He scooped hot water from a kettle hanging over the fire into a tin mug, stirred in some coffee grounds, and walked over to her. He held it out. She stared at the mug, then at his hand. It was large, calloused, the knuckles scarred. She reached out and took it. Her fingers brushed his. He didn't react, just pulled his hand back. She cupped the mug, the warmth seeping into her frozen palms. He sat at the table with his own mug, sipping the black coffee. The silence stretched, filled only by the wind, which had not let up. May had to break it. The question was eating her alive. Why? He looked at her, his gray eyes steady. He didn't pretend not to know what she was asking. You were half dead, he said simply, as if that explained everything. Couldn't leave you in the hay for the wolves or the law. They'll be looking for me, she whispered, the terror of the night before flooding back. That deputy, I heard him. Maybe, Bo conceded, his voice flat. But they won't look up here. Not in this. The storm's covered our tracks. You've got a few days, at least, till it clears and they can get a posse together. If they even bother. He stood, draining his mug. He pulled on a heavy sheepskin coat and a worn hat. He checked the rifle he'd been cleaning, then leaned it against the wall near the door. He paused, his hand on the wooden latch. He still hadn't fully faced her. I ain't gonna ask, he said, his voice low. I won't ask your name, or where you came from, or what you did to get that deputy so riled. He turned his head just enough to meet her gaze. I won't ask questions you're not ready to answer. There's stew in the pot on the hearth. Keep the fire fed. It's the only thing keeping the cold out. He opened the door. A blast of white, blinding snow and freezing wind filled the cabin, making the flames in the hearth dance wildly. He stepped out into the blizzard without another word, pulling the door shut behind him with a solid, final thud. May Caldwell was left alone by the fire, holding a warm cup, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she was completely, terrifyingly safe. The storm raged for 3 solid days. The world shrank to the 4 walls of the cabin, a small bubble of warmth and flickering light against the screaming white wilderness. May's ribs ached, a deep, sharp throb with every breath, but the fever that had clung to her in the hay pile had broken. Bo had checked her side once, his touch brief and impersonal, declaring nothing was broken, just badly bruised. At first, May did nothing but huddle by the fire, watching him. He had a routine that the storm did not interrupt. He would brave the blizzard twice a day, wrapped in his heavy coat, to check on his horse and mule in the lean-to stable, and to care for the few cattle he kept in a small, wind-blocked ravine nearby. He would return covered in ice, his face raw from the wind, bringing in logs that were caked in snow. He never complained. He just moved, his actions economical and precise. On the second day, she felt strong enough to stand without dizziness. She took the stew pot, scrubbed it clean with hot water, and refilled it, adding the last of the salted pork and dried beans from his meager supplies. She found his rhythm and began to move within it. She didn't ask. She just did. She swept the hearth. She refilled the water bucket, melting snow in a pot. She mended a tear in his coat lining, her fingers stiff and clumsy with the needle, but her stitches were small and even. He watched her, but said nothing. The silence in the cabin was thick, heavier than the blankets of snow piling up outside. It was not an empty silence. It was filled with everything unsaid, every question unasked. When the storm finally broke on the 4th morning, the world was blindingly white, the sky a sharp, painful blue. The silence of the snow-covered landscape was absolute. I need to check my traps, Bo said. It was the first full sentence he'd spoken to her since the first morning. He strapped snowshoes made of bent wood and rawhide to his boots. He took his rifle, a pouch, and a long knife, and he left. May watched him from the window. a dark figure moving with surprising speed against the vast, unforgiving white. The land was beautiful, but it was a cruel beauty. The thornbrush and mesquite were skeletal, draped in ice. The wind, though calmer, still cut like a razor, whipping plumes of snow off the high drifts. Last night, they had heard the coyotes, their yips and howls sounding desperately close, a hungry chorus in the frozen dark. This land did not forgive weakness. She spent the day tidying the one-room shack, needing to feel useful. It was a man's space, sparse and functional. A cot, a table, 2 chairs, a trunk for his clothes, and shelves for his supplies. There was no softness, no curtains, no decoration save for a set of deer antlers nailed above the door. It was the home of a man who expected nothing from the world and wanted nothing given. He returned late in the afternoon, the setting sun turning the snow to shades of pink and purple. He carried 2 rabbits, limp and dark against the snow. He tossed them onto the porch without a word, then set about skinning them with practiced, efficient movements. May came out and took the skinned rabbits. She cooked them in the pot with the last of the onions and some wild herbs she found drying in a bundle by the chimney. The smell of the stew filled the cabin, a rich, savory scent that fought back the cold. They ate at the table. He had not spoken since his return. Beau's hands were rough, the knuckles and palms layered with old scars and new cuts. He handled his spoon the same way he handled his rifle, with a steady, deliberate purpose. May's gaze kept drifting to him. She was used to men who filled a space with noise, with boasts or demands. Beau filled the space with his quiet, solid presence. It was unsettling. She found herself watching his face, the hard lines of his mouth, the way his eyes seemed to constantly scan, even when he was just staring into the fire. He finished his stew, pushed the bowl back, and went to the hearth. He sat on the floor, leaning against the rough stones, and began to clean his rifle again. It seemed to be his one ritual of peace. May stayed on the cot, her hands clasped in her lap. The storm was gone, which meant the snow would begin to melt. The outside world would return. The deputy, the marshal. Tularosa. Her safety was temporary. This strange, silent truce they had formed was as fragile as a pane of ice. She had to say something. She couldn't bear his charity, this unspoken debt that was growing with every meal, every log he put on the fire. She was used to bargains. She understood payment. This was something else. "The snow will melt soon," she said, her voice sounding small in the quiet room. He didn't look up from the rifle bolt he was oiling. "In a few days. The drifts are high, but it'll go." "I'll leave, then," she said. He stopped, his hands going still. He looked at her. His gray eyes were shadowed in the firelight. "Where to?" "I don't know. South, Mexico, maybe somewhere he can't find me." "You hurt a lawman," Beau said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. "They don't let that go, and that deputy, he recognized you, said you were wanted by a marshal." May flinched, the shame washing over her, hot and acidic. He was right. He had saved her, and he was harboring a fugitive. He deserved to know what kind of trouble she had brought to his door. She owed him the truth, or at least a part of it. She took a breath, the air burning her lungs. "I'm not what you think I am," she whispered, staring at her own hands, at the raw, split skin. He resumed cleaning the rifle, the soft, rhythmic scrape of the oiled rag against the steel. "I don't think anything about you, girl." "I'm no saint," she burst out, the words tearing from her throat, desperate to shatter this illusion of her as just some woman in trouble. She needed him to see the filth. What that man said, the deputy, it wasn't all lies. I'm not a good woman. I've done things, lived in ways. She couldn't finish. The words choked her. She was admitting she was spoiled, ruined. She was waiting for the disgust, for him to tell her to get out, to throw her back into the snow. Bo set the rifle piece down. He looked at her, his gaze direct, unblinking. It stripped her bare, but not in the way she was used to. He wasn't looking at her body. He was looking at her. He was silent for a long moment. Then, his mouth quirked in something that was not quite a smile, but a grim acknowledgement. "Good," he said, his voice a low rumble. May stared at him, bewildered. "What?" "I said, good." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. The firelight played on his scarred face. "This land ain't for saints. And angels, they break too easy. I need a real woman, not an angel." His words hit her harder than a slap. A real woman. He had looked at her confession, at the shame she wore like a second skin, and he had not flinched. Their eyes locked. It was the first time they had truly looked at each other, not as rescuer and victim, but as a man and a woman. The silence that rushed back in was different. It was no longer empty. It was charged, humming with a sudden, sharp tension. May's breath caught in her throat. She saw the loneliness in his eyes, a desolation as vast as the snow-covered mountains outside. And she saw something else, a flicker of heat, a hunger that matched the desperate, aching need growing inside her. She looked away first, her heart hammering against her bruised ribs. The air in the cabin was too thick, too warm. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay on the cot, and he lay on the floor by the fire, just as he had every night. But everything was different. She was intensely aware of him. She could hear every breath he took. She could feel his presence across the small room, a physical weight. The fire burned down to red-gold embers. The cabin was filled with shadows. The wind had picked up again, a low moan around the chimney. May sat up. The blanket fell away from her shoulders. He wasn't asleep. He was lying on his side, facing her, watching her in the dark. Neither of them spoke. The question hung in the air. A living thing. She stood from the cot. Her legs were trembling. She wore only the thin chemise he must have found in her meager bag, the one she'd been wearing under her ruined dress. It offered no protection from the cold, or from his gaze. She took one step toward the fire, then another. She stopped when she was standing over him. He looked up at her, his face a map of shadows. He didn't move. He just watched, waiting. Slowly, she knelt on the hard-planked floor beside his pallet. "May," he whispered. It was the first time he had used her name. She hadn't even told him. He must have heard it in the alley. She leaned in, driven by a force she didn't understand. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't payment. It was a raw, mutual recognition. She was broken, and he was scarred. They were two halves of the same harsh world. She touched his face, her cold fingers tracing the line of his jaw. He didn't flinch, but she felt a muscle jump beneath his skin. Then she kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not pure. It was raw, clumsy, and desperate. It was the taste of coffee, wood smoke, and a loneliness so profound it felt like starvation. She kissed him with all the fear and rage and desperate hope she had held inside for years. For a second, he was utterly still, as if shocked. Then his hand came up, burying in her hair, and he kissed her back. His mouth was hard, demanding, but not cruel. He pulled her down, rolling so he was half over her, their bodies pressing together on the thin blanket. The kiss deepened, becoming a fierce, silent conversation. It was a claiming. It was a surrender. She clawed at his shoulders, pulling him closer, needing to feel his weight, his solidity. His hand moved from her hair, down her neck, over her shoulder, finding the curve of her waist. His touch was rough, calloused, but it sent a shock of heat through her that had nothing to do with the fire. He pushed the thin strap of her chemise aside, his lips moving from her mouth to her jaw, to the soft, sensitive skin of her neck. May gasped, her head falling back. This was it. This was the familiar territory. But then, just as the feeling was cresting, just as she was bracing for the inevitable, he stopped. He went rigid. He pulled his mouth from her skin, breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers. His whole body was trembling with the effort of holding back. "Beau," she whispered, her voice thick, confused. He pulled back, just enough to look at her. His gray eyes were dark, almost black, and filled with a fire that terrified and thrilled her. "Not like this," he rasped, his voice thick. He touched her face, his thumb brushing her lower lip. "When you want it, not when you're scared, not when you think you owe me." He rolled off her, putting a foot of space between them. He sat up, running a hand through his hair, his back to her. "Get back on the cot. May," he said, his voice quiet, but strained. "Go to sleep." She stared at his back, trembling from the cold and the frustrated, aching need. He had stopped. He had stopped. Shaking, she rose to her feet and crawled back under the thick wool blanket on the cot. She lay there, her body thrumming, and listened to him sit by the fire for hours, feeding it logs, the only sound the hiss of the wood and the howling of the wind. The next morning, the world was white again. The blizzard had returned with a vengeance, burying them even deeper. It howled like a living thing, angry and relentless. They were trapped, not for one more night, but maybe 2 or 3. The tension from the night before was a palpable thing. May couldn't look at him. She busied herself with cooking, her hands shaking. He spent the morning outside, stubbornly clearing a path to the lean-to, fighting the pointless, back-breaking battle against the accumulating snow. When he came back in, caked in ice, she had hot coffee waiting. He took it, their fingers brushing. The jolt was as sharp as a shock. They were trapped in this small space, filled with a desire that had been acknowledged and then denied. It was unbearable. That night, after their silent meal, the storm was so loud it shook the walls. May was sitting by the fire, mending one of his shirts. When she finally spoke, the silence was more dangerous than the truth. "He was a preacher," she said, her voice quiet. Beau, who was oiling his boots, looked up. He didn't speak, he just waited. "My father," she clarified, her eyes on the flames. "He was a preacher, a man of God. He spoke of hellfire and damnation, and he spoke of purity, especially for me." She swallowed, the needle still in her hand. "When I was 16, his deacon, a man my father trusted, a man who ate at our table, he cornered me in the church pantry. He told me I was a vessel of sin, and that it was his duty to cleanse me." Beau's hands had gone still. "I fought," May whispered, the memory making her feel cold despite the fire. "I fought hard, but he was a strong man, and when he was done, he told me if I ever spoke of it, he would tell my father I had tempted him, that I was a harlot. I told my father anyway. I ran to him, crying, my dress torn." She paused, the old, bitter taste filling her mouth. "My father looked at me. He looked at my torn dress and my bleeding lip, and then he looked at his deacon, and the deacon just shook his head, looking sad. My father told me to get on my knees and beg God for forgiveness. He said I was a liar, a child of Jezebel. He disowned me. He turned me out of his house that night." She hadn't realized she was crying until a tear hit her hand. She angrily wiped it away. That was the start. After that, it was easy to fall. I went to the next town. There was no work for a woman alone, not decent work. A man, the brother of Marshall Hayes. He owned the big hotel. He offered me a room and meals and pretty dresses. She laughed, a short, ugly sound. I became his kept woman. I was smart. I was pretty. He liked to show me off. But he was a cruel man, and when he got tired of me, he didn't let me go. He passed me to his brother, the Marshal, Hayes. He said I was his property, that I owed them. He used me, and he let his men use me, until one night, I couldn't. I stole a horse and $20 from his desk. And I ran. That deputy, he worked for Hayes. He knew exactly who I was. He knew what I was." She finished, her story laid bare in the small, warm cabin. She felt empty, scoured out. She waited for Beau's judgment, for him to look at her with the same disgust her father had. Beau was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the wind. He set his boots down. He stood up, walked to the fireplace, and stared into it. His back was rigid. "War," he said. His voice was rough. May looked up, confused. "I had a brother, younger brother, Silas." He spoke to the flames. "He was 17. All he wanted was to be a soldier. Went and signed up with the Confederate Army. I went with him, to protect him." He picked up a poker and jabbed at the logs, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. "It was 4 years of hell, but I kept him alive. Sawmill Creek, Shiloh, Chickamauga. I kept him alive. I was a sharpshooter. I got good at it, too good. I learned how to kill men from half a mile off. Learned to feel nothing at all." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "We were coming home. The war was over. We were just outside of Vicksburg. We had nothing, starving. We met a man, another veteran, heading home. He said he had food at his farm, just a mile off. He offered to share. Silas was so hungry. He trusted him. I didn't, but I was tired. We went with him. It was a trap. He had 2 brothers, bushwhackers. They wanted our boots and my rifle. Silas, he wouldn't give them the rifle. They shot him in the gut. For a rifle." Beau stopped. His hand on the poker was white-knuckled. "They left him to die. They took my boots and the gun and they rode off. Laughing, I held Silas while he died. It took him all night." Beau turned around. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were burning. "I tracked them. It took me 2 days. I found their farm. I didn't knock. I waited until dark. I used the knife I'd hidden in my belt. The first 2, they were easy. Asleep. The one who shot Silas, he woke up. He begged, just like I'm sure my brother begged. I didn't listen. When I was done, I burned the farm to the ground." He looked at May, his gaze locking with hers. "This land," he said, gesturing to the cabin around them. "This was their farm. I took it, and I built this, and I ain't ever looked back." He had confessed his own damnation. He had matched her story of survival with his story of vengeance. He hadn't flinched from her past because his own was just as dark, just as bloody. May stood up from the hearth. She crossed the small space between them. She stood in front of him, looking up at his harsh, scarred face. He didn't move. She reached up and touched the scar on his eyebrow. He closed his eyes, a tremor running through him. This time, when she kissed him, it was not with desperation, but with a slow, aching tenderness that was almost more painful. He didn't pull her into him. He just stood still, his hands at his sides, and let her kiss him. She pulled back. "I'm cold," she whispered. It was the truest thing she had ever said. He opened his eyes. He looked at her, then at the narrow cot, then at his own pallet on the floor. He understood. He went to the cot and pulled the heavy blanket off it. He laid it on the floor, on top of his own thin one, making a wider, softer bed in front of the hearth. "Here," he said. He lay down first, on his back, fully clothed. He left a space for her. May hesitated for only a second. She lay down beside him, on her side, facing him. He pulled the thick wool blanket up, covering them both. They lay there, inches apart. The fire warmed their faces. The wind shrieked outside. May was trembling, from the cold, from the memories, from the proximity of this man. Beau moved. He didn't try to kiss her. He didn't try to touch her under the blanket. He just wrapped one strong arm around her shoulders, pulling her back against his chest. She settled against him. her head fitting perfectly under his chin. His body was solid, warm. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her back. He was still wearing his shirt and trousers. She was still in her chemise. They lay like that, fully clothed, clinging to each other in the dark. They were trembling, not just from the cold. It was the trembling of two mortally wounded creatures who had finally found a safe place to rest. It was the trembling of unspoken need and the agonizing weight of old wounds. And for the first time since she was 16, May Caldwell slept without nightmares. The thaw came not as a gentle promise, but as a messy, dripping surrender. The world, which had been silent and pure under the snow, turned to mud and slush. The roar of the blizzard was replaced by the constant sound of water running in rivulets down the mountainside. The oppressive, muffled quiet of the cabin was gone, and the outside world, with all its dangers, was audible again. May awoke on the floor pallet to the sound of a heavy thud as a sheet of ice slid from the roof and shattered on the ground. Bo was already gone, checking on the animals. She lay there, tangled in the blankets that still held his warmth, and stared at the gray, muddy light coming through the window. The intimacy of the storm felt like a dream. The confessions, the shared warmth, the trembling truce, all of it felt fragile under the new, harsh light of day. When he returned, stamping mud and melted snow from his boots, the tension was back, different than before. It was no longer the sharp hum of unspoken desire, but the dull ache of reality. "It's melting," she said, stating the obvious. She was already dressed, her own worn clothes feeling stiff and inadequate. "It is," he said, pouring coffee from the pot. "The high pass will be blocked for days, but the low trail to Tularosa will be a river of mud by this afternoon." She took a breath, steeling herself. "I have to leave." He stopped, his back to her. He did not turn. "I figured you'd say that." "I can't stay here. Bo, I can't hide. What I told you about the marshal. He won't stop. He'll send men. He'll find me. I won't bring that here. I won't be the reason you lose this place you fought for." He turned then, his face hard. "And where will you go? Back to that town? That deputy you cut will be healed up and thirsty. He'll have you in chains before you've walked 10 feet. "I'll go south," she argued, her voice rising with a desperate edge. "I'll find a way to Mexico. I can work. I can—" "You can what?" He cut her off, his voice a low growl. "You've got no money, no food. You're still favoring those ribs. You'll starve, or freeze when the sun goes down, or you'll run into an Apache band. It's suicide." "It's better than being a coward," she shot back. "I've been hiding my whole life. From my father, from the marshal, from his brother. I hid in that saloon. I hid in your cabin. I am done hiding. Bo, I have to go." "That ain't bravery. May, that's foolishness. You run out there with nothing. You're just making it easy for them. You want to fight? Fine. But you don't fight a bear with a stick." She glared at him, trembling with the frustration of his logic. He was right, and she hated him for it. "So what am I supposed to do? Sit here and wait for you to bring me rabbits? Become your burden until he shows up and kills us both?" He slammed his coffee mug down on the table, the tin rattling. "You are not a burden. You're here, and you're not going anywhere alone." He grabbed his hat and coat. "We'll go to town, both of us. You need to see what's what. You need supplies. You need to know what you're facing. But you are not walking into the desert to die. I won't allow it." She wanted to argue, but the iron certainty in his voice stopped her. He was not asking. He was telling. The ride down the mountain was miserable. The trail was a treacherous soup of mud and slush. The horses slipped, their breath pluming in the cold, damp air. May was mounted on his pack mule, her torn dress covered by one of his old wool shirts that hung on her like a sack. Bo rode his horse ahead, his rifle in the scabbard, his eyes constantly scanning the hills. They did not speak a word the entire way. When Tularosa came into view, May's stomach clenched into a hard, cold knot. The town looked even uglier than she remembered. A collection of drab, muddy buildings sagging under a gray sky. As they rode down the main street, the town stopped. It was not her imagination. A man rolling a barrel onto a wagon stopped, his mouth open. The blacksmith, hammer in midair, froze. Men outside the saloon, who had been laughing, fell silent. And then the whispering started. It followed them like a physical thing, a wave of venom. The men's eyes were the worst. They didn't just look, they leered. They stared at her, their gazes crawling over her body, taking in the man's shirt, the mule, the reclusive rancher, Bo Ransom, who was acting as her guard. They summed her up. They knew what she was. The women were worse. From behind the curtains of the mercantile, from the boardwalk outside the dry goods, they glared. Their faces were pinched with moral superiority. They pulled their children closer, as if May were a disease they might catch. They whispered to each other, their eyes cold and flat. "That's her," she heard one of them hiss. "The one from the slipper. Stabbed that deputy." "Shameless," another spat. "Riding in with him." May's face burned. She wanted to shrink, to disappear, but Bo's words echoed in her mind. "I need a real woman." She forced her chin up. She stared straight ahead, her back rigid, her hands gripping the mule's saddle horn so tightly her knuckles were white. She would not let them see her break. Bo stopped in front of the livery. He dismounted, tied both animals, and then looked at her. He offered no help. He just waited. "What now?" she asked, her voice hollow. "You said you needed work," he said, his face unreadable. "Go on. Ask." She knew what he was doing. He was forcing her to see the truth, swallowing her pride, which felt like swallowing ash. She slid off the mule. Her boots sank into the mud. She went to the Golden Slipper first. Silas was behind the bar. He saw her and his face darkened. "You," he said. "Silas, I need my job back. I'll work for just the cot. "Are you insane?" he barked, slamming his rag down. "You nearly killed a deputy. He's fine, no thanks to you, but he's sworn a complaint. You're marked. I can't have you here. You're poison. Get out." She stumbled back out into the street. The leering eyes seemed to have multiplied. She tried the hotel, the woman at the desk. A stern-faced matron in a high-necked dress looked her up and down. "We are a respectable establishment, catering to families," the woman said, her voice dripping with disdain. "We do not hire your kind." "My kind?" May whispered. "You know what I mean. Now, please, leave. You are upsetting our guests." She tried the seamstress, thinking she could mend clothes. The woman saw who was at the door and simply shut it in her face. Defeated, she walked back to Bo. He was leaning against a post, arms crossed, watching her. He had seen it all. The rejection, the humiliation. "No one will hire me," she said, the words flat, dead. "No," he agreed. She felt the last of her strength drain away, leaving her empty. "So that's it. I'm an outcast. I have nothing." "You've got you," he said, pushing off the post. "It's all you've ever had. It's all anyone has." He walked past her, toward the general store. "Wait here." "What are you doing?" "Getting supplies," he said over his shoulder. She watched him go, a cold dread filling her. He was going to buy her things. He was going to give her charity. She leaned against the livery wall, her bruised ribs aching, and closed her eyes, wishing the mud would just swallow her whole. He was inside for 10 minutes. When he came out, he was carrying a large parcel wrapped in brown paper and a sturdy box. He walked straight to her and thrust the box into her hands. She looked down. It was a pair of women's boots, sturdy, leather, with a thick sole. Not pretty, but strong. "What is this?" she said, her voice trembling. "It's boots," he said, as if to a child. He held up the larger parcel. And a coat, wool, lined. It'll be cold tonight. He started walking toward the horses. She did not follow. No. He stopped and turned. No. I won't take them. She shoved the box back at him. I won't take your charity. I won't be kept. The word came out as a strangled sob. He stared at her, his face darkening. You think you can just buy me things? She cried, her voice rising, attracting the stares of two men across the street. She didn't care. You think because you saved me, that I belong to you now? Is that it? Am I your property now? Just like I was his? A new coat, a new pair of boots. That's how it starts. I am not your woman to dress up. She was shaking, the shame and rage and humiliation of the day boiling over. I won't. I would rather freeze in the desert than be kept by another man. I won't owe you anything. Bo didn't move. He let her yell, his face a mask of stone. The men across the street took a half-step closer, sensing a spectacle. When she was finished, panting and trembling, he took a step toward her. He didn't grab the box. He grabbed her arm. His grip was not gentle, but it wasn't violent either. It was absolute. He pulled her from the main street, into the narrow, muddy alley between the livery and the blacksmith. He pinned her against the rough wood wall, his body blocking her, his face inches from hers. The men across the street could no longer see them. You listen to me, he said, his voice a low, furious growl that shook her to the bone. You think that's what this is? Pity? You think I'm some dandy from back east, buying trinkets for a whore? She stammered, his intensity terrifying her. You shut up and you listen. His gray eyes were on fire. I watched you walk into this town. I watched them look at you. The men look at you and see a thing to be used. The women look at you and see filth. They see weakness. They see a victim. He leaned in closer. When I look at you, May, I don't see a victim. I see the woman who fought a lawman with a piece of broken glass. I see the woman who told her preacher father the truth, even when it cost her everything. I see the woman who survived things that would have killed a dozen of those whispering old biddies. His hand was still locked on her arm, his thumb pressing into her pulse. This ain't pity, he snarled, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. It's respect. You're a fighter, and a fighter deserves proper boots. He let go of her arm. He stood back, breathing hard. You want to go south? Fine. You want to fight? Fine. But you'll go with a warm coat on your back and good leather on your feet. Now take them, or, God help me, I will put them on you myself. May stared at him, her heart hammering so hard it hurt her ribs. Respect. No one had ever said that word to her. No one had ever looked at her fight and called it worthy. The tears that she had refused to shed in front of the town came then. They welled up and spilled over, hot and silent. She didn't sob. She just cried, the tears tracing paths through the mud on her cheeks. Slowly, her hands shaking, she reached out and took the boot box from him. She clutched it and the paper-wrapped coat to her chest as if they were treasure. Good, he grunted. He turned and walked out of the alley. Let's go home. They rode back up the mountain in silence. But this time, it was not an angry silence. It was a heavy, raw, and trembling quiet. That night, the cabin felt different again. It was a sanctuary, a fortress. May tried on the boots. They fit perfectly. She touched the coat. It was thick and warm, lined with soft sheepskin. It was the finest thing she had ever owned. They ate their stew of salted pork and beans. The tension from the first night was back, the sharp hum of awareness. But now it was layered with something else. The raw emotion of the alley, the shared humiliation of the town, the stark, brutal respect he had offered her. Bo took his pallet by the fire, as he had before they had shared it. He was giving her space. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. May sat on the cot, her new boots lined up beside it. She watched him. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the hard set of his jaw. He had fought for her, in his own way. He had stood between her and the world's scorn. And she knew, with a sudden, startling clarity, what she wanted. It was not payment. It was not gratitude. It was a choice. Her choice. She stood from the cot. He heard the movement and turned his head. He watched her, his eyes dark in the firelight. He didn't speak. She crossed the small, cold space between them. She stood over him, her heart beating a slow, heavy drum. "You said," she whispered, her voice shaking but clear. "You said, when you want it, not before." Beau's gaze was intense, searching her face. "And?" he rasped. "I want it." She did not wait for him to move. She knelt beside him on the floor. She touched him first. Her hand, raw and chapped, came up to his face. She traced the scar over his eyebrow, then the hard line of his jaw. He closed his eyes, his breath catching. She leaned in and kissed him. It started slowly, a tentative exploration. It was a question. His hands came up, not to grab, but to hold. They settled on her waist, his calloused thumbs rubbing small circles, sending shivers through her. He kissed her back, a deep, slow kiss that tasted of coffee and a desperate, profound loneliness. Then the slowness broke. It shattered. The raw, unspoken need that had been simmering between them for days erupted. He pulled her down, his mouth crushing hers, and the kiss turned fierce. It was messy. It was real. It was a collision. There was no grace in it. It was a fumbling, urgent shedding of clothes in the flickering firelight. It was the scrape of his stubble against her neck, the feeling of his rough hands on her skin. He wasn't gentle, but he wasn't cruel. He was present. He was all there. He laid her back on the blankets, his body covering hers, and he paused, looking down at her. His eyes were burning. He was giving her one last chance to stop. She answered by lacing her fingers in his hair and pulling his mouth back to hers. It was a clash of survival and need. He worshipped her scars. His lips traced the old, faded bruise on her cheek. His hand gently, reverently, mapped the tender, discolored skin on her ribs where the deputy had kicked her. He wasn't disgusted. He was memorizing her, learning the damage that had made her. And she clawed at his back. She was not a passive vessel. She was a participant. She held on to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that was trying to wash her away. Her nails dug into his shoulders, leaving red marks on his skin. It was not an act of tenderness. It was an act of claiming. You are here. I am here. It was a desperate, fierce coupling on the floor of a one-room shack, with the wind moaning outside and the fire guttering low. It was a release of all the pain, the fear, the shame. When it was over, they lay tangled, slick with sweat, gasping for air. It was the most real, the most honest thing May had ever known. She woke in the gray light of dawn. She was warm. She was sore in places she had forgotten she could be. She was wrapped in Beau's arms, her head on his chest, the heavy wool blanket covering them both. She lay still, listening to his steady breathing. In the dim light, she saw his face, relaxed in sleep. He looked younger, less hard. She saw the dark scratches her nails had left on his shoulder, and a deep, shuddering sob ripped through her. Beau was awake instantly. He was a man who slept light. He sat up, his eyes wide with alarm. "May?" He saw the tears streaming down her face. His own face went pale. God, May, did I hurt you?" She shook her head, unable to speak, the sobs coming faster. She covered her face with her hands. "No," she finally choked out. "No, you didn't hurt me." "Then what?" he asked, his voice rough with confusion. He reached out, his hand hovering, unsure where to touch her. She looked at him, her eyes raw. "It's the first time," she whispered, the words tearing out of her. "It's the first time in my life that it didn't feel like payment. It didn't feel like I was being used or broken. It just was. He stared at her. The hard rancher, the killer. He was a man of action and violence, not soft words. He didn't know how to answer this, so he did the only thing he could. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight against his bare chest. He just held her, his hand stroking her tangled hair, his chin resting on top of her head. He held her while she cried, letting her weep for the girl she had been, for the woman she had become, for the first clean thing she had ever felt. Later that day, a new, quiet peace settled over the cabin. They moved around each other with an unspoken understanding. She made coffee. He split wood. The tension was gone, replaced by a fragile, tentative domesticity. They sat at the table, drinking from the tin mugs. The new coat and boots were by the door, a silent reminder of what they had faced. Bo broke the silence first. He cleared his throat, staring into his mug. "This," he said, gesturing between them. "Us, hiding in this cabin. It ain't a life. You're right, you can't hide forever." May's heart sank. He was telling her to go. "I know," she said quietly. "I'll leave tomorrow. I'll take the coat and the boots. I'll pay you back. Someday." "Or," he said, cutting her off. He finally looked up, his gray eyes meeting hers. "You don't leave at all." She stared at him. "What do you mean?" "This ranch, it's hard land, but it's mine. I took it, I held it, but it's lonely work. May, I'm tired of being lonely." Hope, a dangerous, terrifying thing, fluttered in her chest. "Bo!" "We could marry," he said, the words coming out in a rush, as if he was afraid they would vanish. "Quietly. Not in Tularosa. I know a preacher over in Red Rock. He minds his own business. A wife, a rancher's wife, Mrs. Ransom." He said the name as if testing it. "A married name. It gives you a standing. It gives you protection. People, they'd have to respect it. Even a marshal. A man can't just take another man's wife. Not without a war." May was speechless. Marry? Him? A man who knew every dark, ugly part of her? "You would marry me?" she whispered. "You know what I am. You know what I've done." "I told you," he said, his voice fierce. "I need a real woman, not an angel. I'm no saint. May, I'm a killer. My hands are stained. We're the same. We're survivors. We could build something. Start over, right here, together." She looked at him, at his scarred face, his earnest, desperate eyes. He was offering her a life, a name, a home. It was everything she had never dared to dream of. She was afraid to touch it, afraid it would turn to dust. Before she could answer, a new sound cut through the air. It was the sound of a horse, not ambling, but being ridden hard up the muddy trail. Instantly, Bo was on his feet. The man of peace was gone, replaced by the sharpshooter. He grabbed his rifle from the wall, his movements fluid and economical. He moved to the door, motioning for her to get away from the window. "Who is it?" she whispered. "Too fast for a casual visit," he grunted. They waited, the seconds stretching. A rider burst into the clearing, his horse lathered and breathing hard. He was a young man, barely 20, from a neighboring ranch miles to the south. "Mr. Ransom!" the boy yelled, sliding his horse to a stop. He looked terrified. "Mr. Ransom!" Bo stepped out onto the porch, the rifle held loosely at his side, but ready. "Jed, what is it? You're gonna kill that horse." I was in Tularosa, sir," Jed panted, his eyes wide. "I just came from there. I heard you was in town yesterday, with a lady." Bo's face hardened. "Spit it out, boy." "A marshal, sir. He just rode in, from Fort Mason. He's got 3 men with him, hard men. He's asking questions, about you, about a woman." May stepped into the doorway, her blood turning to ice. Jed's eyes darted to her, and his face went pale with understanding. He's at the saloon. He's telling everyone he's looking for a fugitive. He's calling her. He's saying he's hunting a whore who stabbed a lawman." The boy looked back at Bo, his voice dropping. "And he knows she was with you. Someone told him. They're saying he's coming up here. Mr. Ransom. He's coming for her." The air in the cabin was so thick with tension it was hard to breathe. Jed's words hung in the space. An ice-cold sentence of death. The boy, having delivered his message, looked desperate to flee, his eyes darting between Bo's stony face and May's, which was as white as the snow patches outside. "Get home, Jed," Bo said, his voice a low rumble. He pulled a silver dollar from his pocket and tossed it to the boy. "You didn't see us. You didn't come here. You understand?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Ransom. I never seen a thing." The boy wheeled his horse around and kicked it into a frantic gallop, disappearing down the muddy track. Bo shut the door, the simple sound of the latch clicking into place seeming as final as a gunshot. He turned to May. "He knows you're here," Bo said, his voice flat. He was already moving, his body all economy and purpose, the soldier taking over. He grabbed a heavy canvas sack. "Mexico, we ride south. Now, we can be across the border in 2 days if we don't stop." He started stuffing the sack with dried jerky, a bag of coffee, and a box of cartridges. He was not asking. He was commanding. May stood frozen by the table. She looked at the new coat and boots by the door. She looked at the man she had given herself to, a man who was now ready to abandon his home, his life, for her. The old, familiar shame washed over her, cold and sickening. She brought ruin. She was a curse. "No," she whispered. Bo stopped, the box of cartridges in his hand. "What did you say?" "No." She said it louder, the word tasting strange and powerful on her tongue. She picked up the new wool coat, her fingers gripping the thick, soft fabric. "I won't run. I won't make you run." "This ain't a choice, May," he said, his voice sharp with a sudden, raw fear he rarely showed. "This is Marshal Hayes. He ain't that half-wit deputy. He's a federal lawman, and he's got 3 men. They'll come here, and they will kill us both. They will hang you. Or worse. We leave. Now." "And then what?" she cried, turning to face him. Her eyes were blazing, the tears of the morning long dry. "We run to Mexico? And when he sends bounty hunters, do we run again? To South America? We run until we are old and tired and still looking over our shoulders? We run until you hate me for making you lose the only thing you ever fought for? This land?" She threw the coat onto the cot. "I'm done running. Bo, I ran from my father. I ran from the marshal. I ran from that saloon. All I have ever done is run." She walked up to him, close enough to see the fire in his gray eyes. "You said I was a fighter. You said you respected that. Well, I won't fight by running. I want to be a woman who stands, right here, on this land. Even if I fall, I will not run again." He stared at her, his jaw working. He saw the terror in her, but he saw the iron underneath it. It was the same stubborn, foolish, magnificent core that had survived her entire life. It was the thing that had made him stop and pull her from the hay. It was the thing he was falling in love with. He let out a long, slow breath. The soldier receded, and the man returned. He nodded. "Once." "All right," he said, his voice rough. "We don't run. We stand." He set the supplies back on the shelf. "But we don't stand blind. I'm going to town. Alone." May's heart seized. "No, not alone. He's there. I need to see him. I need to see his men, see what they're armed with. I need to hear what poison he's spreading, and who's lapping it up." He grabbed his hat and his heavy coat. "This is my fight now, too. I know how to do this part. May, I know how to watch." He pulled the spare rifle from the wall brackets, a heavy Winchester. He checked the load and handed it to her. "Bar the door behind me. Don't open it. Not for anyone. Not even if you think it's me." Not until you hear my whistle, he demonstrated. A low, two-note sound, like a canyon wren. If it's anyone else, you shoot. Through the door if you have to. You understand? She nodded, her hands cold on the oiled wood of the rifle. He paused at the door, his hand on the latch. He looked at her, his face a mask of grim determination, but his eyes were full of a raw fear for her. He didn't kiss her. He didn't touch her. He just held her gaze. Be a fighter, May. Then he was gone, swinging onto his horse and riding down the trail, not fast, but steady, like a man heading out for a day's work. May shut the heavy wooden door and slid the thick iron bar into place. The cabin was suddenly, terribly silent. Bo rode into Tularosa the next morning. He didn't ride down the main street. He'd slept cold, hidden in a ravine 2 miles out, and came in from the south, stabling his horse at the far end of town in a deserted shed. He moved through the alleys, a ghost in the gray dawn. He found a spot in the narrow gap between the smithy and the assayer's office, across from the Golden Slipper. He was just another shadow. He waited. Around 10 o'clock, they arrived. Marshal Hayes was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a thick neck and a face made arrogant by authority. He wore a clean duster and a silver star that shone even in the dull light. He was flanked by 3 men, hard cases all, with low-slung guns and eyes that missed nothing. Hayes strode into the saloon as if he owned it. Bo slipped closer, staying in the shadow of the horse trough. The bat-wing doors were open to the street. Hayes's voice boomed, carrying clearly, "I'm looking for a thief and a whore," he announced to the room. Silas, the barkeep, froze, his hands in a bucket. Name of May Caldwell. She stabbed a peace officer in Fort Mason and stole a significant sum of money from my brother. He threw a piece of paper on the bar. A warrant. Federal. She's a fugitive. I heard she came here. I heard she was taken in. His gaze swept the room. And I heard she was seen with the recluse. Ransom. The saloon was silent. Men stared at their glasses. She's a manipulative creature, Hayes said, his voice taking on a friendlier, man-to-man tone. Uses her body to get what she wants. Twists men up. She's dangerous. There's a $200 reward for her capture. $200. Bo's stomach tightened. That was more money than most of these men saw in a year. The murmuring started. Men who had leered at May 2 days ago now looked righteous, their eyes greedy. She was here, Silas said, his voice oily. That animal Ransom, he came and got her. Took her up to his place, the one he stole from the Miller brothers after the war. I know the man, Hayes said with a cold smile. A killer and a traitor. Figures he'd shelter a whore. They're probably up there now, rutting like animals. The men in the saloon laughed. The sound made Bo's hand tighten on the pistol in his pocket. He needed to leave. He had what he needed. As he was sliding back into the alley, he saw the town's pastor, Reverend Gideon, hurry across the street. The preacher, a thin man with a gaunt face, had clearly heard the news. He marched into the saloon. Marshal Hayes, the preacher said, his voice high and reedy. This is a God-fearing town. We will not abide such disgrace. That woman, she is a vessel of sin, a harlot of Babylon. She was here, spreading her filth. It is a stain on our community. Bo didn't wait to hear more. He'd heard enough. He slipped back through the alleys, retrieved his horse, and rode hard for the mountains, his face a mask of cold fury. May had not slept. She sat in the chair by the cold hearth, the rifle across her lap, watching the light change. Every sound from the mountain, a rock slide, the cry of a hawk made her jump. She was alone, utterly. Around noon, she heard a horse. It was moving slowly, not the steady, impatient pace of Bo. Her heart hammered. She crept to the window, peering through the crack. It was Reverend Gideon, the Tularosa pastor. He was riding his sway-backed mare, his black coat flapping. He stopped in the clearing, his eyes scanning the cabin with disapproval. He looked, May thought, like a vulture that had smelled death. "Miss Caldwell," he called out, his voice thin in the clear, cold air. "I know you are in there. I am here as a man of God. Open this door." May said nothing. She held the rifle tighter. "This is a house of sin," he shouted, his courage growing. "You have brought your filth to this mountain. You have corrupted a man and you have defied the law. The marshal is in town. He has told us what you are." May's blood ran cold. The marshal, he was here. "Open this door and repent," Gideon urged. Dismounting, he took a few steps closer. "You are a disgrace, child, a harlot. You are damned. But there is time. Confess your sins. Come with me. The marshal will see your repentance." Repentance. The word was a lie. Her father's word. It meant chains, and shame, and a cold cell in Fort Mason, and Marshal Hayes's hands on her. She lifted the iron bar. The scrape of the metal was loud. She pulled the door open and stepped onto the porch. She held the rifle. The preacher stopped, his eyes going wide at the sight of the gun. "Put that down, child. That is not a tool for a woman." "This is private land," May said, her voice low and steady. It surprised her. It did not shake. "This is God's land, which you are defiling," he shrieked, his face turning red. "You are a disgrace to your sex, a common whore who stabs men. You are—" May was done. She was done with his words, with her father's words, with the marshal's words. She looked at the preacher, at his weak, self-righteous face. She spit in the dirt at his feet. The preacher gasped, as if she had struck him. He was speechless. "Get off this land," May said. The words were cold. They were final. "Now. You will burn," he sputtered, backing away. He scrambled onto his horse. "You will burn for this, you Jezebel." He yanked the horse's head around and galloped away, his dignity forgotten. May watched him go. She was shaking, but not from fear. It was a clean, pure rage. She went back inside and barred the door. Beau returned at dusk. He gave the two-note whistle, a sound that made May nearly collapse in relief. She unbarred the door. He stumbled in, his face etched with exhaustion and a deep, cold fury. He looked around the cabin, at the rifle she still held. "He's here," she said. "I know. I saw him," Beau said. 4 men, counting him, well armed. "The preacher was here," she said, her voice flat. "He called me a disgrace." Beau just nodded, his eyes dark. "I figured someone would be—" He walked to her and gently took the heavy rifle from her hands, leaning it against the wall. He looked at her face, at the defiant set of her jaw. His own hands were trembling, not from cold, but from rage. He cupped her face. "Are you all right?" She nodded, unable to speak. He kissed her. It was not the slow, tender kiss of their lovemaking. It was not the fierce, desperate kiss of the night before. It was a kiss of pure, raw desperation. It was the kiss of a man clinging to the only thing left in a world that was on fire. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. "We're gonna survive this," he whispered, his voice thick. "Not run, not break. We stand together." That night, the cabin was no longer a sanctuary. It was a fortress under siege. They knew the marshal would come. Maybe tonight, maybe at dawn. The waiting was its own torture. They didn't eat. The fear was a cold stone in their bellies. They sat by the fire, the rifles close, listening to the night. The need to feel alive, to affirm the one good thing they had in the face of the darkness, was an agonizing, physical ache. Beau looked at her, his eyes full of a terrible, painful need. She saw it, and she felt it, too. She reached out and took his hand. He didn't need any other signal. He pulled her to her feet and into his arms. his mouth finding hers. They made love on the pallet by the fire, but it was nothing like before. It was a desperate, almost violent clinging. Every touch was hurried, every kiss a bruising affirmation. It was not about pleasure. It was about driving back the cold, driving back the dark. It was the frantic, desperate act of two people who knew they might not see another sunrise. Afterward, they lay tangled, their bodies damp, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The fire was low. May held his head against her chest, her fingers threaded in his hair. "You make me feel like I'm worth something," she whispered into the dark. Bo held her tighter, his arm like a steel band around her. "You are," he growled, his voice thick. "You're worth all of it." The dawn came, gray and freezing. Bo was already up, dressed, checking his rifle, his pistol. He was a soldier again. May's heart ached, watching him. He had a piece of paper in his hand, the deed to his ranch. "He's coming for you," Bo said, his voice flat and hard. "But men like Hayes, they don't just take what they're owed. They take everything. They're greedy. We're gonna use that." He laid out the plan. It was simple. It was brutal. "I'm gonna ride out. I'll meet him on the trail. I'll tell him I'll give him anything to let you go. When he refuses, I'll offer him this." He held up the deed. "I'll tell him the land is worth more than the bounty. I'll tell him I'll sign it over. But the paper is at the cabin. He'll want the land and you. He won't be able to resist. He'll think I'm a coward, begging for your life." "Bo, no, he'll kill you," May said, grabbing his arm. "He'll try," Bo said, his face grim. "He'll come to the cabin, all of them. He'll think I'm inside, ready to sign, but I won't be. I'll be in the rocks, up there." He pointed through the window to the high ledge that overlooked the trail into the clearing. "I know that spot. I can see everything. It's a sharpshooter's nest." He grabbed her shoulders. "You will stay inside. You will bar this door. You will not, under any circumstances. Come out. You hear me? May? No matter what you hear, you let me handle this." "What about me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You're the bait, and I'm the trap." He kissed her, hard and fast. "Now bar the door." He was gone. May did as he said, her hands shaking so badly she could barely lift the bar. She ran to the window, rifle in hand, and waited. An hour passed. It was the longest hour of her life. The sun was just starting to crest the mountains, bathing the clearing in a cold, unforgiving light. Then she heard them, 4 riders, coming up the trail. Marshal Hayes was in the lead, a smug, triumphant look on his face. He was laughing. Bo was not with them. A cold, sick terror gripped May. Did they kill him on the trail? Did his plan fail? They rode into the clearing. Hayes dismounted, swaggering. "Ransom!" he bellowed. "I'm here for my property. Send your whore out and we'll get this over with." The world exploded. A single, deafening rifle shot cracked from the rocks above. One of the marshal's men, the one on the far right, was flung from his saddle as if by an invisible hand. He was dead before he hit the mud. "Ambush!" Hayes roared. He dove behind the low, stone water trough, pulling his pistol. The other 2 men leaped from their horses, scrambling for cover, firing wildly at the rocks. Bullets ricocheted, sparking off the stones where Bo was hidden. May watched, her heart in her throat. Bo was pinned. The 2 men were laying down a heavy fire. Then she saw it. The 3rd man, the one closest to the cabin, was not just shooting. He was moving, ducking behind the lean-to, trying to get a better angle. He was flanking Bo. He was going to get behind him. He was going to kill him. "No, not him. You will not take him." May's terror vanished, replaced by the same cold, clear rage she'd felt with the preacher. She shoved Bo's spare rifle through the small crack in the window, the one they used for ventilation. Her hands were perfectly steady. She'd never shot a man. She'd barely shot a rifle, but she'd watched Bo. She knew what to do. She sighted down the long barrel. The man was moving, running from the lean-to toward a copse of trees. She tracked him, her eye aligning the sights. She breathed out, just as she'd seen Bo do. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked her shoulder, the sound deafening inside the cabin. In the clearing, the flanking man stopped. He looked down at his chest, a dark, spreading stain on his shirt. He looked up, his face a mask of pure surprise. Then he pitched forward into the dirt and did not move. Marshal Hayes screamed, a sound of pure fury. He saw his second man fall. He looked at the cabin, his eyes wide with shock. He fired a wild shot that thudded into the log wall beside May's head. Another shot came from Bo's rifle, chipping the stone trough, sending fragments into Hayes's face. The marshal cried out, clutching his cheek. He was bleeding. He looked at his last remaining man. He looked at the rocks. He looked at the silent, deadly cabin. He was exposed. He was outnumbered. He scrambled for his horse, panic in his eyes. "It ain't worth it. Let's go!" He vaulted into his saddle, his last man doing the same. They wheeled their horses, spurring them frantically back down the trail, fleeing for their lives. Silence. The clearing was still. 2 bodies lay in the mud. The sun was fully up now, its light shining on the blood. The only sound was the wind, and May's own ragged breathing. She let the rifle slip from her fingers, her body sliding down the wall until she was sitting on the floor. She wrapped her arms around her knees and began to shake. The silence in the clearing was louder than the gunshots that had preceded it. It was a thick, heavy quiet, broken only by the wind whistling in the pines and the wet, dripping sound from the 2 bodies lying in the mud. May was still on the floor, her body locked in a violent, uncontrollable shake. She heard the sound of the iron bar being lifted from the outside. Bo must have had a way to unlatch it. The door creaked open. He stood there, framed against the cold morning light. His face was pale, streaked with gunpowder and dirt. He was alive. She scrambled to her feet, a sob of pure relief catching in her throat. "Bo!" She ran to him, but as she got closer, she saw his left arm. He was holding his right hand clamped over his shoulder, and a dark, wet stain was spreading rapidly down his chest and the sleeve of his coat. "You're hurt," she whispered, her voice hollow. "It's just a graze," he grunted, but his face was tight with pain. He pushed past her into the cabin, his rifle in his good hand. He was scanning the clearing, his eyes still moving, still hunting for threats. "May," he said, his voice sharp. "The horses. Now. Bring them to the lean-to." She didn't question him. The shaking stopped, replaced by a cold, functional calm. She ran outside, her eyes avoiding the 2 dead men, and grabbed the reins of Bo's horse and her mule, which had run to the far side of the clearing. She led them into the small, 3-sided stable. When she came back, Bo was sitting at the table, his coat and shirt off. He was deathly pale. It was not a graze. The bullet had torn through the thick muscle of his shoulder, a ragged, weeping hole that bled profusely. "Get the whiskey," he ordered, his teeth gritted. "And the needle from my kit, and bandages." She moved. She found his small mending kit, the one with the thick needle for canvas and leather. She found the bottle of whiskey he kept for emergencies. She ripped one of the cabin's 2 clean sheets into long strips. "This will hurt," she said, her voice shaking again. "Just do it," he said, bracing himself against the table. She poured the whiskey over the wound. Bo didn't cry out. His whole body went rigid, a low hiss escaping his lips, but he didn't make a sound. The smell of alcohol and blood filled the small room. She poured more onto the needle, her hand surprisingly steady. She had mended shirts. She had never mended a man. She pushed the needle into his skin. He grunted, his eyes squeezed shut. She worked, pulling the rough thread tight, her movements becoming more confident with each stitch. She was closing the wound, her face inches from his, her hands covered in his blood. Their silence was profound. It was heavier than the snow, heavier than the grief of the days before. They had crossed a line. They had killed, She had killed. The intimacy of the night before, its desperate passion, seemed like a lifetime ago. This was something else. This was a partnership forged in blood and gunpowder. When she was done, the stitching was ugly, but it was closed. She bandaged it tightly with the clean strips of cloth. He opened his eyes. His gaze was raw, stripped of all pretense. He looked at her, at the blood on her hands, at the grim set of her mouth. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. He reached up with his good hand and touched her face, his thumb brushing a smudge of gunpowder from her cheek. His love for her was there, in that one small gesture, loud and violent in the quiet, blood-stained room. "We have to move them," he said, his voice hoarse. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled. "You will not," May said, her voice iron. She pushed him back into the chair. "You'll bleed out. I'll do it." "May, you can't." "I can," she said. "I shot him. I can move him." She went back outside into the cold, bright morning. She did not let herself think. She grabbed the first man, the one Bo had shot, by his boots. She pulled. He was heavy, a dead, awful weight. She dragged him into the trees, out of sight, into a shallow ravine. She went back for the second man, her man. She looked at his face, his eyes open and staring at the sky in surprise. She felt nothing, no remorse, no fear, just a cold, empty finality. She took his boots and pulled him, the body leaving a dark trail in the mud. When it was done, she went to the pump and washed her hands, scrubbing them with lye soap until her skin was raw. She went back inside. Bo had managed to put on a clean shirt, his left arm hanging useless at his side. He was staring at the deed to his land, still on the table. "He'll be back," Bo said. His voice was dull. "Hayes, he's not a man who forgives. He's humiliated. He lost 3 men. "He lost 2, May corrected him quietly. "1 fled with him. 2 or 3. It don't matter. He'll go back to Fort Mason, and he'll tell them we ambushed him. He won't say he was hunting a woman. He'll say he was hunting a traitor, a cop killer." His eyes met hers. "He'll paint you as a demon, a whore who led me to kill. The news will spread. A bounty will be posted. A big one. $500, maybe 1,000. For you, May, for shooting a lawman, and for me, for helping you." May stared at him. $1,000. An army of men would come for that, every desperate, greedy man in the territory. "They can't stay," he said, nodding toward the dead men in the ravine. "The wolves will come, and then men will come to see what the wolves are doing. We have to go, tonight." The words hit her. "Go! Leave!" It was not over. It was just beginning. The life he had offered her, marriage, a home, a name, it was gone. It had turned to ash in her mouth. She hadn't saved them. She had doomed them. It was too much. The running, the fear, the killing, the blood on her hands, the wound on his shoulder. It all came crashing down on her. A high, thin sound escaped her throat. "No," she whispered, backing away from him. "No, no, no." "May, stop it. We have to pack." "You don't understand!" she screamed, her voice breaking. She grabbed her hair, pulling at the roots. "It's me! It's always me! I am cursed!" She gestured wildly around the cabin, at his bloody bandages, at the rifle she had used. "I bring ruin. I ruin my father. I ruin that deputy. I ruin this home, your land, the land you killed for. You're wounded. You're a wanted man. Because of me. I bring death." She collapsed onto the cot, her body convulsing with sobs. She was a plague. She was the disgrace the preacher had called her. Everyone who touched her was destroyed. Bo watched her, his face pale and strained. He slowly walked over to her. He didn't sit. He knelt, on the floor, at her feet, his wounded shoulder sending jolts of pain through him. He reached out and took her hands. pulling them away from her face. She fought him, but he was stronger. Even with one arm, he held her fists. "You're right," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. She stopped sobbing, her breath catching, and stared at him, her eyes wide with pain and confusion. "You do bring death," he said, his gaze unflinching. "You brought death to those men who came to kill us. You brought ruin to the Marshal's plan. You are not a curse. May, you are a damn storm, just like me." He brought her hands to his lips. He kissed her knuckles, one by one, her raw, chapped, blood-stained hands. "This cabin," he said, his voice thick. "It was just a box. This land was just dirt. I was alive, but I wasn't living. I was a ghost, May, just like you. I was waiting to die." He looked up at her, his gray eyes burning with a fierce, terrifying sincerity. "You are the reason I feel alive again. If I have to lose this land, if I have to run, if I have to kill 100 men, if it's with you, then it's worth it. You are not my ruin. May, you are my reason." She stared at him, her tears still wet on her face. He meant it. This scarred, broken, violent man meant every word. He saw her, all of her, the killer, the survivor, and he was not afraid. He was not disgusted. He was proud. She leaned down and kissed him, a deep, salty, tear-filled kiss. It was a seal, a vow. "All right," she whispered, her voice steady again. "We run." They had to burn the cabin. It was his idea. It was the hardest one. "We can't leave it," he said, his voice flat. "We can't let him have it. And we can't leave tracks. A fire. It'll burn for days. It will cover everything. It will make them think we burned in it." May nodded, her heart aching. They packed what little they could. 2 horses, 1 mule, jerky, coffee, all the cartridges, 2 rifles, their pistols, a bedroll, and the new wool coat. Bo insisted on taking the deed. "It's all that's left," he'd said. At dusk, they stood outside. May had scattered the embers from the hearth onto the cot. Bo took the lantern's oil and splashed it on the walls. He looked at the home he had built, the one he had killed for. His face was stone. "Do it," he said to May. She took a burning brand from the hearth and touched it to the oil-soaked wood. It went up with a whoosh. The flames licked the dry logs, catching instantly. In minutes, the entire cabin was a roaring inferno, shooting sparks and smoke into the purple twilight sky. It was beautiful and terrible, a funeral pyre for the life they might have had. They mounted their horses. They didn't look back. They rode south, the orange glow of their burning past lighting the way. They rode for days. They skirted Tularosa, moving only at night, hiding in canyons and dense cactus scrub during the day. The land was brutal, a sun-baked hell of rock and thorn. Bo's wound festered. He grew pale, a fever settling in his eyes. May cleaned it as best she could with whiskey and clean water, her heart in her throat every time he winced. He never complained. He just rode, his jaws set, his good hand always on his rifle. She hunted. She used the traps Bo taught her to use, catching 2 rabbits, which they cooked over a tiny, smokeless fire in a deep arroyo. She was the strong one now. She guarded him while he slept, her rifle across her knees. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor. She was his partner. Their nights were cold. The desert temperature plummeted when the sun went down. They slept under the one bedroll, their bodies tangled together, not for passion, but for warmth and comfort. She would press her back against his chest, his good arm wrapped around her, his breath steady against her neck. They held each other under a blanket of stars so vast and cold it made them feel impossible scroll of human misery. After 10 days, they crossed the line. They found a small, dusty border town that seemed forgotten by God and the law. It was a single street of crumbling adobe buildings, a cantina, and a small, whitewashed mission church. They rented a room, a small, clean space with a real bed. Bo collapsed, his fever breaking, and slept for 20 hours straight. May sat in a chair and watched him, just as she had in the cabin. But now, she was his wife in all but name. When he woke, the fever was gone. He was weak, but his eyes were clear. "I saw a church," May said quietly, her hands in her lap. Bo looked at her. He understood. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough from sleep. "Yeah, let's do that." They found the priest. He was an old, wrinkled man with kind, dark eyes that held no judgment. He was watering a small, dusty chili garden behind the mission. "Padre," Bo said, his hat in his hand. We need to be married." The priest looked at them. He saw Bo's arm in a sling. He saw the exhaustion in May's eyes, the way she stood close to him, protective. He saw the rifles on their horses. He was a man who lived on the border of heaven and hell, and he knew fugitives when he saw them. He also knew love. "God does not ask for papers," the priest said, his voice gentle. "He asks only for a true heart. Come." He married them in the small, cool church. It smelled of old wood, melting wax, and incense. There was no one else there. No rings, just a single candle flickering on the altar. They said the vows in hushed voices, their hands clasped. When the priest said, "You may kiss your bride," Bo's hand trembled as he lifted her chin. The kiss was soft, reverent, and tasted of tears. May cried, not for what she had lost, but for this one. Impossible, beautiful thing she had found in the wreckage. She was May Ransom, a real woman, a wife. Later that night, in their small room, May was quiet. She had been sick for the last 2 mornings, a rolling nausea she had blamed on the bad water and the running. But now, in this moment of peace, she knew. She had been counting the days. She was late. "Bo," she whispered. They were lying on the bed, his head in her lap. He murmured, half asleep. She took a breath. I think I'm pregnant." He went still. His eyes opened. He slowly sat up, his face unreadable in the dark. She rushed to speak, the old fear rising. "I'm terrified to bring a baby into this, into my cursed blood, into this life, running, hiding. It's no life for a child." Bo stared at her. And then a slow, wide smile spread across his face. It was the first time she had ever seen him truly smile. It lit up his harsh features, making him look like a different man. He reached out and gently, tentatively, laid his hand on her flat stomach. "Maybe," he whispered, his voice thick with a sudden, overwhelming hope. "Maybe it's the sign we're not damned after all. Maybe it's a beginning." He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss of such profound tenderness it made her heart ache. They had one day of peace, of being husband and wife, of quietly planning. They would cross the river into Mexico at dawn. They would find a small ranch, start over, for real this time, for the baby. They were in the stable, packing their meager supplies onto the mule. It was an hour before dawn, the sky a deep, star-filled indigo. "That's the last of it," Bo said, tying the bedroll down with his good hand. "Let's go." A voice came from the shadows of the stable entrance. "That's far enough. Ransom." A man stepped into the faint light of their lantern. He was thin, with a weasel-like face, and he was holding a .44 leveled straight at Bo's chest. He wore no star. He was a bounty hunter. $1,000, the man sneered, his eyes glittering. "You're the talk of the territory. The sharpshooter and his killer whore. Marshal Hayes wants you both alive, but he'll settle for dead." Bo pushed May behind him, his body shielding her. His own pistol was still holstered. He'd been working, not expecting trouble. "You don't want to do this, friend," Bo said, his voice low and steady. "I very much do." The bounty hunter smiled. "Now, your gun? Toss it over. Slow. Bo calculated the odds. His bad arm. The man's steady aim. He couldn't draw in time. As Bo slowly reached for his pistol, the man's eyes flickered to May, who was half hidden behind Bo. And the woman, she's the one who shot down Jeb. Quite the looker. I'm gonna enjoy taking you. He never finished the sentence. Bo used the man's momentary distraction. He lunged, not for his gun, but at the man, tackling him with his good shoulder. They crashed to the straw-covered floor. The bounty hunter's gun went off, the shot deafening in the small space, the bullet burying itself in a wooden post. Bo was strong, but he had one arm. The bounty hunter was wiry and fast. He brought the butt of his pistol down hard on Bo's wounded shoulder. Bo screamed, a raw sound of agony, and fell back. The bounty hunter scrambled to his feet, a triumphant, ugly look on his face. He raised his pistol, aiming it directly at Bo's head. "So long, sharpshooter," he hissed. A second shot exploded. The bounty hunter froze. A look of complete, comical surprise crossed his face. He looked down at his chest, where a new, dark hole had appeared. He looked at May. She was standing 10 feet away, her legs braced, Bo's spare pistol held in both hands, smoking. Her face was a mask of cold, white rage. The bounty hunter crumpled to the ground, dead. May didn't move. She just stared at the man she had killed, the pistol still outstretched. Bo, clutching his bleeding shoulder, pushed himself to his feet. He looked at the dead man. He looked at his wife. She had saved his life. Again. The sound of shouting came from the town. The gunshots had woken everyone. "May," Bo said, his voice urgent. He grabbed her arm. "May, we have to go, now!" She dropped the pistol, her trance broken. She grabbed her rifle. Bo grabbed his. They ran from the stable, leaving the dead man behind. They ran through the dark, deserted alleys, toward the dark, quiet line of the river, and the promise of Mexico. They ran. They didn't stop until the shouts of the town were long gone, swallowed by the darkness and the rush of the river ahead. They reached the bank, the water a wide, black, churning ribbon in the pre-dawn gloom. This was it, the line. "We have to swim," Bo said, his voice ragged. His shoulder was bleeding again, a dark, wet patch on his shirt. "You can't," May said, her eyes wide with terror. "Not with your arm." "I have to." He slid off his horse. "The horses can swim, but we have to get them in. We go now, or we die here." He was right. There was no choice. He pulled his pistol and, wincing, fired a shot into the air, yelling to spook the horses into the water. They balked, but another shot sent them plunging in, their heads straining against the current. "Now," he said, grabbing her hand. The water was so cold it stole her breath. It was a physical blow, a liquid ice that clamped around her chest. The current was fast, pulling at her skirts, trying to drag her down. She held onto her rifle, but the river wanted to claim it. Bo was struggling. She could hear his harsh, ragged breaths. His bad arm was useless, and his good arm was fighting to keep his head above water. He was going under. "Bo!" she screamed. He surfaced, gasping. He was being pulled downstream. May's terror for him, for the tiny life inside her, turned to iron. She was a strong swimmer. She had grown up near a creek. She fought the current, angling toward him. She let go of her rifle. It was just weight. She reached him, grabbing the back of his shirt. "Kick!" she yelled. "Just kick!" She put her arm across his chest, fighting the river for both of them. It was a brutal, exhausting battle. It felt like hours. Her lungs were burning. Her legs were numb. Finally, her feet touched mud. Soft, sinking, glorious mud. She clawed her way onto the far bank, dragging Bo with her. They collapsed, gasping on the soil of Mexico. They lay there for 10 minutes, their bodies heaving, too exhausted to move. They were soaked, freezing, and alive. Their horses were gone, likely swept further downriver. The mule, smarter than the horses, was 30 yards away, calmly shaking water from its hide. Their supplies, their future. "We made it," Bo whispered, his teeth chattering. "We made it. May—" They found a town 2 days later. After walking, it was called Tres Rios, a sun-baked handful of adobe homes and a crumbling mission. It was not a paradise. It was just as poor and dusty as Tularosa. But it was not America. There was no Marshall Hayes. There was no bounty. They rented a small room near the river, a single, cool space with a hard-packed dirt floor, a narrow cot, and a single window that looked out onto a shared courtyard filled with chickens and laughing children. It was the safest place May had ever been. Life began. Slowly. Bo's shoulder was healing badly. It would never be right again. The muscle was scarred, and he would never have his full strength back. But he was alive, and his hands were still good. He found work at a large hacienda north of the town, training horses for a wealthy patron. He had a quiet way with animals that needed no translation. He would come home at night, exhausted, his good arm aching, and hand May a few centavos. May sewed. Her pregnancy was beginning to show, a small, firm curve to her belly. She mended clothes for the women in the town, her fingers, once raw from lye, becoming deft and quick with the needle. They traded for food, corn, beans, goat cheese, and sometimes a scrawny chicken. They tried to live quietly, but the past was a third person in their small room. Healing was slow. Bo still checked every shadow. When they sat in the plaza in the evening, listening to the guitars, he sat with his back to the wall, his eyes tracking every man who passed. He flinched if a vaquero laughed too loudly. He woke up, sometimes, in a cold sweat, his good hand reaching for a rifle that was no longer beside the bed, his bad arm throbbing with a phantom pain. He was a man braced for a blow that never came. May was no better. The sound of a door slamming made her jump, her heart hammering. The smell of cheap tequila from the cantina across the street made her stomach clench, bringing back the memory of the deputy's hot breath. She had nightmares, dreams of the bounty hunter's surprised face, of the man she had shot in the clearing. She would wake up gasping, her hands checking her belly, assuring herself the baby was real. Their love was quiet, forged in these small, shared terrors. It was loud in their smallest gestures. It was Bo, rubbing her back when the sickness took her in the morning. It was May, silently rebandaging his shoulder when the old wound wept. It was the way his hand found hers in the dark, his thumb rubbing circles on her palm until her breathing slowed and she fell back asleep. They were two broken, wary animals, learning to be safe in the same den. One night, May could not sleep. She was 7 months pregnant, and the child was restless. She felt trapped by the heat, by the past, by her own changing body. She slipped out of the room, leaving Bo in a deep, exhausted sleep. She walked to the river. It was calm now, a silver sheet under the full moon. It was the same river that had tried to kill them, the same river that had saved them. She stared at her reflection in the dark water. She saw a woman she barely recognized. Her face was leaner, harder. Her eyes were older. This was not the girl who had arrived in Tularosa. This was not a victim. This was May Ransom, a wife, a killer, a mother. She touched her stomach, where the baby kicked. She was terrified of what was inside her. Was it her father's cold judgment? Was it her own cursed blood? "I'm not a saint," she whispered to her reflection. The words were a confession, but they were also a release. It was the truest thing she knew. "Neither am I." His voice was low, right behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. Bo stood there, a silhouette against the moonlight, his own rifle in his good hand. He was always watching. He came to stand beside her, looking out at the water. He slipped his good arm around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He was a solid, warm presence in the cool night. I'm a killer, May. I've got the blood of 3 men on my hands that I killed for revenge, and 2 more that I killed for you. I'm no saint. I'm not even a good man. She leaned her head back against his uninjured shoulder. I know. But we keep choosing each other, he said, his voice a rough whisper. Every day. We choose this. We choose to stay. That's all that matters. She went into labor 3 weeks early. The timing was a cruel joke. A storm, a violent, tropical deluge, had hit the town. The river was rising, the wind was howling, and the night was a chaos of noise and water. It started fast, a sharp, low pain that doubled her over. "Bo!" she cried out. He was by her side instantly, his face pale with a new kind of terror. "It's too soon. It's not time." "It's time," she gasped, gripping his hand. "The baby is coming, now!" There was no midwife. There was no doctor. The one woman in town who helped with births was on the other side of the now flooding river. They were alone. "All right," Bo said, his voice shaking. He was a soldier. He was a rancher. He had killed men, stitched his own wound, and broken wild horses, but this terrified him. He looked at his hands, one strong, one scarred and weak. "Bo, I'm scared," May whimpered, as another contraction ripped through her. "I'm here," he said, his voice steadying. He forced his fear down. "I'm right here. We're gonna do this, just like we've done everything else." It was a long, brutal night. The storm raged outside, the wind shrieking, the rain lashing against their small window. It was as if the world was trying to tear itself apart. Inside, May was fighting. She was strong, stronger than he ever knew. She fought the pain, her body straining, her cries lost in the sound of the wind. Bo was her anchor. He held her. He wiped her face with a cool, damp rag. He spoke to her, his voice a low, steady rumble. He told her about the ranch he would build for them, about the horses he would buy. He told her she was a fighter. He told her to breathe. He was terrified he was losing her. She was bleeding too much. He remembered holding his brother, Silas, as his life drained away. He would not lose her. "Push, May!" he yelled, his voice raw. "Push! You fight! You hear me? You fight!" She gave a final, agonizing scream that seemed to tear the very air in the room. And then, a new sound cut through the storm. A high, thin, furious wail. Bo froze. His hands, covered in blood, were holding a tiny, slippery, perfect creature. A baby. "A girl," he choked out, his voice breaking. "May, it's a girl. She's got fierce lungs." May collapsed back onto the sweat-soaked pillows, her breath coming in sobs. Bo quickly cleaned the child, his rough hands surprisingly gentle, and wrapped her in a clean piece of cloth. He laid her on May's chest. May looked at the tiny, red, screaming face. She touched the baby's cheek, and she wept. She cried for the girl she had been, for the men she had killed, for the life she had lost, and for this impossible, perfect thing she had gained. "She's clean," May whispered, her tears falling onto the baby's head. "She's free. She has no past." Bo sat on the edge of the cot, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. He pushed the damp hair back from May's face. He looked at his wife and at his daughter. "So are you," he said, his voice thick. "So are you." Months passed. They named her Sarah. The past didn't disappear. It was not a wound that could be sewn shut and forgotten. It was a part of them now. Bo's shoulder ached every time a storm rolled in. May still woke from nightmares of falling, of Marshall Hayes's cold eyes. But the past was behind them. It was a story they had survived, not a prison they still lived in. The acute, daily fear was gone, replaced by the immediate, demanding reality of a child. Their small room was filled with new sounds, with Sarah's laughter, Love didn't erase their scars. It bound them. It made them a family. 2 years passed. They had a small ranchero now, a few miles outside of town, with a small adobe house, a dusty corral, and 5 good horses. Bo was building a reputation. He was the quiet, scarred Americano who could gentle any horse. May's sewing and her skill with herbs earned them respect. They were poor, but they were their own. They were at peace. One evening, the sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. Bo was in the corral with Sarah. She was a toddler now, fierce and independent, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Bo had her sitting in front of him on his gentlest mare. He was walking the horse in a slow circle, his bad arm resting on the saddle horn, his good arm wrapped securely around his daughter. He was speaking to her in a low voice, his face soft, and he was smiling. May watched from the porch. She had been washing clothes, her hands now clean, resting on her apron. She watched her husband, the killer, the survivor. She watched her daughter, the child who was born free. She wrapped her arms around herself, the old, familiar gesture of holding in the pain. But it wasn't pain she felt. It was a fullness, a quiet, aching joy. She slowly unwrapped her arms. She walked off the porch, across the dusty yard, to the corral. Bo stopped the horse when he saw her. He smiled. May didn't go to her daughter. She went to him. She stood beside the horse, and she wrapped her arms around Bo's waist, leaning her head against his back, right over his scarred shoulder. She felt the steady beat of his heart. He relaxed into her hold, his hand covering hers. Together, the 3 of them watched the sun disappear behind the canyon. I didn't need a savior. I needed someone who saw me, all of me, and still stayed. Thank you for listening to this story. We hope you enjoyed this journey into the hard-bitten, realistic world of the American West. We love hearing from our audience. Please leave a comment and let us know where in the world you are listening from. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more original, authentic tales. We would love to hear your thoughts on May and Bo's story. Please share them in English in the comments.